Once again, American forces are bombing Iran. So once again, I have to ask, what exactly do American voters have to do to avoid war in the Middle East? Welcome to the Reason Roundtable. This is your weekly libertarian review of news and culture from the editors of Reason Magazine. I'm your host, Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by my colleagues, Katherine Mangu-Ward, Nick Gillespie, and Matt Welch. Happy Monday, everybody, or maybe not so happy if you're not stoked about a new war of choice in the Middle East. So, Matt, last time we talked about this was in June of last year when Trump bombed Iran. We criticized that. We said okay, maybe it's one and done. Maybe this is a one-off, but it could lead to more, it's sort of greater consequences. And people were like, oh, look, no, this is a Jacksonian thump. That's all it is. This isn't war. This is actually going to prevent war. He obliterated the nuclear facilities. That's what it says on the White House website, right? There's this great bit. Iran's nuclear facilities have been obliterated and suggestions otherwise are fake news. June 2025, White House headline. What happened? Why are we at war now?
I think that the best explanation of the 75 explanations that President Trump has come up with came in his pre-dawn White Hat speech, where he said, after reciting a litany of abuses, very real abuses that the Iranian regime has engaged in over the years, including towards Americans, he just said, and we're just not going to take it anymore. That's what it is. He used the phrase imminent threats. No one really believes that there was an imminent threat. He just sort of has to say that because of the war powers resolution, kind of, sort of. But he doesn't really care about that too much. They've been trotting out a bunch of other things, but it's because he has decided, and the president in the United States has a ton of power and discretion to use the military. He has decided that we're not going to take the things that Iran has done for years, which is export its revolution, it's harass people, kill Americans, etc. And he's did this precisely because of the aforementioned bombing raids of last June, which basically decimated the anti-air, if there was any, really anti-air capabilities of Iran. And so Iran was weak. And he, along with Benjamin Netanyahu, decided to strike while the enemy was weak and get rid of, as much as they think that they can, their nuclear capabilities, their navy, and their ballistic missile systems. So it's a war, a preventive war, preemptory war of choice, of opportunity against someone that has no imminent threat towards us at all. We just felt like we wanted to take care of this problem because the president decided so.
I mean, Trump has said that, they were 2 weeks away from maybe having nuclear capability. This is again in less than a year after they posted, well, we obliterated their nuclear capability. And anybody who says otherwise, fake news, right? So there's all these excuses and explanations here. But Katherine, isn't that in and of itself quite worrying? If you don't have a reason for going into a war, then you're not going to know when it's over. Like, how do you have an end game? How do you have a plan for finishing this if you don't have a clear objective?
Recent American wars don't seem to have been waged with that thing in mind, like, at all. I mean, I was kind of reflecting on the fact that I think for almost my entire conscious political life, Iran has been 2 weeks away from having a nuke. Like, that's how it feels, at least to me, is that like that.
That's what John Bolton's been saying.
That sentence has been said, in a,
not literally,
in a, very, very regular way for as long as I've been paying attention to this question, and maybe even longer, which makes perfect sense if you think about it from the perspective of every American president has preferred to keep the option open of going to war with Iran at any time. And Trump decided today was the day, or this weekend was the weekend. And I truly think it's exactly like his tariff policy. Like, why did he do this thing? Because he wanted to. Because this is a thing that sounded like the sort of thing that he would like to do, so he did it.
My boxes, my tariffs, my war with Iran.
Yeah, basically. And, I don't want to minimize, like, I'm sure we'll have a chunk in this podcast where we do the thing that every podcast in America is doing this week, which is to note that it was, couldn't have happened to a nicer guy to be totally obliterated by American bombs. We're not mad about his death, but like, if the U.S. government
You're talking about the Ayatollah Khomeini,
the Ayatollah,
who was the supreme leader of Iran, who was killed in the opening salvo of the airstrikes over the weekend,
and his nearest and dearest. But like, if the U.S. government killed everyone that I thought sucked, that would be bad foreign policy.
Maybe also bad for this podcast.
It might be an upgrade,
and certainly bad foreign policy. And anyway, that it was only one small part of the reason. I think the much bigger part of the reason was Trump wanted to do it, so he did.
Okay, but Trump has been saying for forever, since he has been in public life, that he doesn't want to do this. Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, literally sold a T-shirt that says, "No war with Iran." J.D. Vance published a piece in the Wall Street Journal. I don't have the headline quite in front of me, but the headline is something like Trump's greatest foreign policy achievement, no new wars. And yet, per Axios, no president in the modern era has ordered more military strikes against as many different countries as Donald Trump. He's attacked 7 different nations. It's not just Iran. This is a consistent and clear pattern with Trump, who was supposed to be the peace candidate, who ran on, we are absolutely not going to do this. How did we end up in this situation once again, Nick?
So we don't know, and we talked about this, I think, last week. We don't know, because Trump did not explain why he didn't do that in the State of the Union. He didn't do that in any kind of address or communication with Congress. And it's deeply troubling. The one thing that we do know, or that seems to be hinted at, is that he and Netanyahu had talked about this back in December. So the timing, while maybe kind of arbitrary, it seems like this plan was in place for a while. We're obviously doing negotiations with Iran about creating a new deal, a new nuclear deal, which Trump reneged on, when he became president the first time. To follow up on, I think something that Katherine was saying, or Peter, that you were saying, when you go into a country, when you enter a war without any kind of idea of what the mission is, it makes it really hard to figure out when to stop or when to quit or when to pull out. And, when this happened over the weekend, my first thoughts were to Afghanistan, because, Obama famously said Afghanistan compared to Iraq was the good war. And Iraq, we had this long process by which the Bush administration laid out the threat posed by Iraq and then, how we were going to defeat them. That did not work out very well. In Afghanistan, people were like, okay, well, we have to go after bin Laden and al-Qaeda, who were being, given safe harbor in Afghanistan. But I interviewed last fall the director of a great documentary called Bodyguard of Lies, which was about Afghanistan. And the whole point was we never had a clear thought through rationale for why we were in Afghanistan. And it started out that we were going there to destroy al-Qaeda and kill bin Laden. Then it was to stop another 9/11. Then it was to stop Afghanistan from becoming a terrorist haven. Then it was nation building, and that was like around 2005. We'd already been there for 4 years. Then it was counterinsurgency and winning hearts and minds. Then it was preventing the collapse of the country that we had just put together. And then finally, it was kind of like counteracting terrorism while we pulled out. And you look at a war that goes on for decades. The Afghanistan experience here is really important because it lays out exactly what happens when you have no idea why you entered a war, how things build on themselves, they create a momentum. We really need to figure out, or Congress needs to demand some clear answers, and they may need to pull the plug on this. And, that would be almost unthinkable, but it's also something that would make a lot of damn sense.
Matt, the best joke I saw on Twitter all weekend, I think, was it's a great thing that Congress isn't alive to see this.
Yeah.
Which is really, sadly, exactly correct here. I mean, it does seem like there's going to be a vote on war powers maybe this week, right? Some of this is scheduled. It's not quite that there's going to be no congressional action. But for those of us who sort of are opposed to this, not just as a war of choice that we didn't need, but also as a severe violation of the constitutional order and the process that is supposed to happen before America enters war, what are we supposed to do here? What is the path back to something more sane?
I mean, encouraging your Congress critters to vote and vote very hard this week is a tentative step. You think about Neil Gorsuch's concurrence in the Supreme Court case that overruled the emergency tariffing power. It's basically a very like civics lesson for 11-year-olds about, the Constitution says that legislative branch is really super duper important. And it was sort of written for Congress, like, hey guys, slap them in the face, snap out of it. And so it takes a bit of that to begin with. I want to issue special condemnation here for cowardice. Chuck Schumer and other Democrats, as Matthew Petty was reporting on our site, and Alyssa Slotkin kind of confirmed when we talked to her on the Fifth Column podcast. Democrats could have voted on this, or like could have tried to vote on this last week and kind of decided not to. Let's just sort of kick this can down the road. Trump's going to do his thing. Maybe we'll talk about it afterwards. It was Democrats who were trying to slow the roll on a vote because they are afraid of having their names associated with a vote, as happened in 2003 in Iraq. And they have lost that kind of constitutional architectural will to do a damned thing. Nick mentioned Afghanistan, and it's important to point out the Taliban runs Afghanistan. But in addition to that comp, the one I've been looking at today is Libya. That's a war of choice, a preventative war of choice.
It was a kinetic action, Matt.
Kinetic military
not a war.
action.
It was whatever. This is not a war, right?
So, according to the War Powers Resolution, you can do something. The president can do something when there's actionable threat. There wasn't in this case. And so then after 60 days, the president can no longer do that without congressional approval. So Congress back then, which was run by the kind of the Tea Party generation of Republicans in the House of Representatives, said, hey, no, you got to bring him back. And he's like, no. And like didn't respond, like, new phone, who dis. It was a series of absolutely brazen, you don't really have that power. We don't really have to talk about it. And even when in 2013, when we almost went to war with Syria at the time, we've forgotten about it now. Even all the way up to that, Obama at the last minute said, okay, I want to get Congress's sense of this. So we're going to have a vote, but I don't need it. I just kind of want it. Because at that time he was waffling and scared, and the British House of Commons had voted against it. But presidents have successively, including and especially Democratic presidents who run as anti-war candidates, have degraded this constitutional architecture over and over and over again. And what happened in Libya? All of the arguments for Libya, most of them, you can make, you can just cut Control V onto Iran. They were exporting terror. They were developing a nuclear weapon, which they ended up giving out. But they killed Americans. They did a lot of really horrible things. Their dictator was mowing down dissent and dissidents. All of that is true. Go read the quotes that we had on our website from 2011 from all of this. And people were like, yeah, we just go and knock them out. Newt Gingrich, John McCain, Anne-Marie Slaughter, Hillary Clinton thought it's going to be easy peasy. Here we go. What happened? We created a failed state through which there was a mass migration into Europe of a bunch of people from Libya and from Syria. It helped the creation of ISIL and ISIS. It was a big problem that led to civil war and lots of death and destruction. So, let's learn from recent history. We're not, but we should try.
I keep having this feeling also that Reason Magazine, which, foreign policy isn't even our main thing. Right? We like to cover it well. Matthew Petty is doing a great job. Thank God for him. And we did more to prepare for this possible eventuality and then to greet it immediately with an appropriate response than the U.S. Congress did. There's various congressmen who are out here tweeting you better believe when we get back in town next week, we are going to have something to say about this. And it's we're not the New York Times. This is not even our main beat, but we had a piece pre-written. We monitored the developments. We posted something quickly and then we covered it further. It's not that hard to have known this was coming, to have prepared for it, to have done your job in the system of this thing. Our job is to tell people about it and to help people think through it. But Congress's job should have been to authorize it. This wasn't a surprise to them. And yet It's very like when your father gets home, you're going to be in trouble. Like we're going to get to you shortly on whether this war is okay. Ridiculous.
Something else that's going to happen shortly is we're going to come right back with more discussion of this. Well, it's tax season again, and charitable donors all over the country are digging through emails, receipts, and bank statements, and they're trying to reconstruct a year's worth of charitable giving. The good news is there is a better way. Donors Trust is the donor-advised fund provider for libertarians. Our friends at Donors Trust can help you simplify your giving, maximize your tax advantages, and support the causes you believe in, all from one account. You can contribute cash, stock, other assets. You will receive a single receipt for your tax deduction each year. And you can recommend grants to your favorite organizations on your own schedule. No more December 31st rush. No more tax season scramble. Plus, the experts at Donors Trust can advise you on the most effective giving strategies. Their team shares your limited government views and will ensure that your giving remains faithful to your convictions. To learn more, download 6 key reasons to use a donor-advised fund. Just go to donorstrust.org/reason. That's donorstrust.org/reason. This will make your next tax season a lot less painful. Okay, so since Matt Welch brings up, right, they didn't even bother having a vote here, taking it to a vote, right? Obama kind of maybe wanted one, but it's not. That's a decade in the past. We're way over that. I think one of the reasons why Trump didn't want to take this to a vote, get a vote in advance, is because that would have required him to make a clear and affirmative case, state the objectives, state the reasoning, and then allow a debate on it. And they didn't want that to happen. And you can see why they didn't want it to happen in the polls. The Ipsos poll over the weekend is the first poll that polled after the bombing started, found that only 27% of Americans support the war in Iran. That is even fewer than the minority that supported the bombing last year. And they just didn't want to make the case. They just sort of feel like they have the right to do everything, whatever they want. They don't have to provide a clear reason for it, which is why we get all of these different reasons. Just in the past couple of days, we have seen the aim is freedom for the people of Iran. That's what Trump told the Washington Post. Maybe we can end it in 2 or 3 days, or maybe it's going to be 3 or 4 weeks. That's Axios in the New York Times. Trump said he has 3 very good choices for taking control in Iran. Oh, wait, actually, he told ABC, never mind, those choices are dead. I think it's because either the United States or Israel killed them. This does not seem like it is a good plan, Katherine, but it also seems like it's not just that they didn't make a case. Yeah, there wasn't like a big speech explaining this or announcing it. It's that they made an affirmative opposite case for years. The Tulsi Gabbard t-shirts, all of these statements that people are circulating on social media from J.D. Vance, in which Vance just says, we are absolutely not going to go to war in Iran. Well, guess what? President Trump, Pete Hegseth, they're using the word war. This is a multi-week bombing campaign in a foreign country. This is a war. We're at war in Iran, and it already looks like it's escalating. What are people supposed to do about this? How do we respond when our political leaders are just not in any way paying any attention to the polls, to their own campaign promises?
I have been wondering many of these questions myself, and in fact, commissioned a cover story for the next issue of Reason magazine, which you might have heard of.
It's a good magazine.
Called Who Can Stop the President? It's going to be Gene Healy writing about the tools that exist and the extent to which they remain to put the brakes on this kind of thing. Because I do think that is the big question right now. Like, is there anything to be done? Are there any levers left to pull? I think there are still a few. And I think this thing obviously can't, like, it has now happened. We have engaged in this kinetic action or war or whatever we are calling it. But
Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump are calling it a war.
But it is, as they have also signaled, like, it could be over tomorrow or never. And so I think that is the thing on which there is still some potential input from the democratic process, from the courts, from the polls, from the markets. And we will see if any of those tools do any good. Matt always does the call your Congress critter thing. And I always have mixed feelings about it because on the one hand, sometimes that does work, right? Like it is still true that if your phone line in your congressional office rings a whole bunch of times and it's a bunch of people saying the same thing, that sometimes the Congress people will bestir themselves to try to respond to that. And on the other hand, they've shown themselves so unwilling to move on this issue for so long that it is hard for me to really imagine a change of heart from Matt Welch and 10 little old ladies on the other end of the phone.
Nick,
well, the other lever, which, and it's not immediate, but it's, it's elections. And there's a reason why no party has been able to maintain a stable majority or a coalition over time. And it was a big reason, George Bush left office the least popular president in recent American history. A big part of that was the financial crisis, which he certainly did his part to help along. But a big part of it was the way that he prosecuted wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and pushed the Patriot Act through, and did not, actually put the funding up to a public vote for a long period of time. People like Dick Cheney and a penchant for secrecy certainly helped that along. The Republicans were already looking pretty weak in the midterm elections. I think you're going to see a real reckoning with this, even if it turns out that toppling the head of the Islamic Republic yields, a flowering of democracy and representative government and limited government and free markets and stuff like that, because the process here is really bad. And every once in a while, you can luck into a good outcome. I think that's unlikely, and it's disturbing. But even if it is, people are not going to forget. Like, this is not a way to run a country. Donald Trump has already, set a record for executive orders in this term. He's acting more and more dictatorially. The people in the MAGA coalition, right before this podcast, I was looking at a CNN interview with Marquane Mullen, the senator from Oklahoma, where it's just like, can you explain what we're doing here? And like, he could not, seeing a guy, and clearly, he's a senator, so he already is starting, with a double-digit IQ at best. He could not say two sentences in a row that did not completely contradict one another, because he knows this is bullshit, both the way it was done and how it fits with his, campaign promises, and especially Donald Trump's America First kind of ideology. So
Nick,
look for a blowout.
Nick, is there an argument for this war or this kinetic action or whatever we're going to call it that isn't bullshit? And in particular, Katherine referenced this earlier, but this idea that Khomeini was a bad guy. He just in the past couple of months is reported, these are rumors, it's hard to know the count, but reportedly has killed 30-something thousand protesters in his regime. Even before that was happening, this is somebody who has just brutally ruled over an oppressive, totalitarian regime for 40 plus years here. He's bad. There are people celebrating in the streets in Washington, D.C., but also, at least according to some videos, which I don't think are fake, in Iran itself. They're saying, this is great. We're glad America is here. Is that a reason to maybe think, well, this might work out. Maybe this is even a good idea?
Those are two very questions. Is it a good idea? And might it work out? It's always good to see a despot, kicked out of office, either, through being killed or being exiled or deposed in some other form. I think the best case that you can make for this action, and again, the secrecy undermines this, but if in fact this is part of a multi-state action against a regional actor that has been one of the major, if not the major exporter of state-backed terrorism and domestic interference in countries that it didn't belong in. And if this is Israel working in concert with Egypt and Jordan and UAE and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states that were saying enough to Iran's regional interference, and that this is a way where you're going to see that region take care of itself and create a better, more peaceful, more representative set of governments for itself. That's the best case scenario. And one can hope that has something to do with this, but who knows? And then you get back to this larger point of, dropping a bunch of bombs on a country and then thinking that it's fertilizer in there, it's democracy fertilizer and everything's going to be okay after that. That does not work. And it hasn't worked in the past, and it's not going to work now.
There's this horrific irony, though, right? Like, we are going to bomb the shit out of a foreign country in order to teach them to not interfere in other countries' business is like a real tough row to hoe. I mean, it's very much like the parents smacking the kid in the back of the head and being like, don't hit your brother. Like, I don't know why there's so much domestic violence in my commentary today, but
foreign policy.
The idea that this can be a lesson, like, you cannot teach this lesson in this way. You cannot teach the lesson of mind your own business by bombing a country that has not otherwise come for you.
But you can by creating a regional alliance. And, I think Matt and I, our differences on NATO may have narrowed somewhat over the years, but, NATO is something like that, where it's like, okay, there's a big bully in your backyard and we're going to create a strategic alliance where we're in this together to help prevent stuff. I don't know that any of that pertains to the Middle East, but, the Abraham Accords were Donald Trump's certainly his greatest foreign policy achievement as a president. And to the extent that there is some furtherance of that, that also is predicated upon the U.S. leaving the Middle East, which obviously it is back with a vengeance now. I could see a positive case being made for that.
If I can make a brief point about public opinion, because I think it's sort of important. The fact we're starting this war with negative ratings on it. And the start of the war is when it's going to look the best, unless there are unforeseen magical rainbows at the end. And there could be, and I'm rooting for those rainbows. It'd be great. And I'm really happy for my comrades and Tehrangelis who are celebrating on the streets. It's a wonderful release of a lot of things. But public opinion in America, one of the reasons why you get populism to begin with is that there's a wide swath of public opinion that is consistently not even consulted in the prosecution of very important policies. That was true, especially with Afghanistan, also Iraq, and some other issues as well. Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, in different ways, both were able to capitalize and take advantage of the fact that there was populist discontent with people consistently doing unpopular things as presidents. I'm seeing so many people rehearse these arguments that the Weekly Standard used to make a lot of, and somehow the Bulwark isn't anymore. I don't know what changed. It's certainly not the personnel. But people are rehearsing these arguments like
Catherine no longer works.
Trump today said, I don't look at polls, which is abjectly not true. But a lot of people's agreeing with that, like, oh, he shouldn't look at polls. He's doing what's best for the country. We don't have to, check in with Americans. We just need to do what's right. That's what John McCain used to argue all the time in 2007, 8, and 9 in regards to Iran, among other things. Like, why can't we stay? Why can't we have our troops in Iraq for another 50 or 100 years? It kind of doesn't matter. You can't do that. You cannot have American foreign policy consistently untethered to popular opinion. You have to check in with the country. He didn't do it during his State of the Union address. He didn't do it meaningfully with the Congress, and he hasn't done it since launching these attacks. That is a strategic error if your desire is to continue to engage in your foreign policy, and you will be punished. And that is, per Nick's point, that's the mechanism, Peter, by which some of this begins to claw back. There will be repercussions for this.
On that point, real quick, Matt, just on Twitter, I had written something about how, this is a war of choice, among other things. And I got like 15 people being like, when did this war of choice rhetoric start? Where were you during Obama and Bush, et cetera? And it's like, why don't you go back about 25 years ago when the U.S. entered 2 wars of choice and people started talking about wars of choice as opposed to wars of necessity. The amount of historical amnesia is like just neck snapping, if that is a really bad mixed metaphor, I suppose. But it's, it is just amazing that we have barely come out of, 20 plus years of terrible, stupid, unresponsive foreign policy. And now we are right back. It's like we're right back to where we were.
Matt, to your point, the populists are revolting, at least a few of them, including your namesake, Matt Welch, not Matt Welch, who is out there on Twitter saying the reasoning here makes no sense. And in fact, that this is not obviously good for America. You have Eric Prince, right, the Blackwater guy, saying maybe this will cause regional destabilization that would be bad and also not in America's interests here.
Recall that Blackwater is now officially known as strawberry shortcake. So.
All right.
When you scratch it, does it smell like artificial strawberry, like those dolls used to? Yeah.
I think that's going to be the name of the next mission, right? It's going to be Operation Strawberry Shortcake. But what do you make, Matt, of your namesake's kind of unusually strong opposition to Trump here? Of the kind of the fact that some MAGA influencers genuinely thought, I think even for understandable reasons, that the one thing that Trump wasn't going to betray them on was war, because it's something Trump has been super consistent on.
They thought they had their man in the White House, J.D. Vance, who was, it's not hard to find him on the record saying, well, we're not going to do X, Y, and Z in Iran ever, and it doesn't turn out to be true. I think part of that is that you've always had over the last 10 years, but kind of accelerating the last 5, this attempt by people in the influencer world or just commentariat or whatever to create this kind of architecture to backfill the ideological architecture of what MAGA means, as if that there is a coherent through line to everything, and that it isn't just more sort of following the whimsical notions of where Donald Trump has an enthusiasm right now. It's pretty interesting. It's part of the succession battle of what happens when he starts to amble off the stage. And this will get intensify after 2026 midterms, which will probably be a wipeout for him. And he's no longer going to be around. So people are going to be jockeying for position. And part of that architecture among some people has been a skepticism about U.S. adventurism abroad, and also a skepticism and sometimes just a conspiratorial discussion about Israel in particular. So you see a lot of this from Tucker Carlson, for example, a couple of days just before this strike. He posited that Trump doesn't want to do this. He knows because he's talked to him. Trump doesn't want to do this. So if he ends up doing it, that's because they have gotten to him. So I think there's going to be a lot of that type of thing going on. I am, in my own way, that's, you use the word revolting. There's a couple of different definitions of that word. I'm not normally in league with those people. I am happy to see, because it's just rare in Trump era conservatism, people breaking with him for any reason, even if I don't agree with it. Just because the mind lock has been so strong for so long. I think there is a sizable block among MAGA conservatives who don't like foreign adventurism and think that they're seeing it now. I don't think that we're going to be doing a whole lot of nation building, but also we don't know. Is that going to be enough to mollify them? I kind of don't think so, precisely because we're edging closer to midterms when there's going to be a reckoning for this.
Katherine, I want to ask you a generational question. You and I are about the same age. And also, I think it was Matt or Nick who said something about, 25 years ago, arguments that were being made at the Weekly Standard when you were at the Weekly Standard, when we were at war with Iraq. And I think that was your magazine's fault,
to be quite honest,
at that time, right? Certainly a lot of people said, well, this is the Weekly Standard's war of choice in Iraq. And you can understand why, or someone could understand why here. But there's this other argument that I've seen going around, which is that actually the way that the war in Iraq rolled out created a kind of generational political trauma for elder millennials in particular, where they're just so scarred by that thing that they don't understand that, in fact, we've just been doing like kind of sweep bombing every now and then, like air campaigns, and they work pretty well. Like we all just got PTSD. We got one-shotted and gigafried by the Iraq war. And like now we don't understand that, in fact, sometimes intervention works. Things have changed, the rules of warfare, the international geopolitics of all of this. Like, what do you make of that?
I thought you were going to go the other direction with the intergenerational trauma narrative and say the war in Iraq was actually just, our generation ish. working out the trauma of the first Gulf War and how that went down, and that in fact we
that wasn't our generation. That was just the Bush family.
Okay, that was just the Bush family's trauma, but now it's everyone's trauma. And that, in fact, people who are traumatized seek out repetitions and replays of those traumas, and in a sort of misguided and pathological attempt to work them out. And so, in fact, we are doing the same thing that traumatized us over and over without sufficient self-awareness to realize that we are doing the same thing over and over, and it is always going to end the same way until we break the pattern. That's the version of the trauma story that I would tell. And
men would rather go to war in the Middle East than
go to therapy. Yes, like literally, yes. I do think it's interesting that we've gotten this like space has opened up between regime change wars and nation building. Like those phrases used to be kind of used interchangeably or in a tightly connected way. And I think that for sure the thing we learned in Iraq was we are garbage at nation building and we should not try to do that. But, we have Hegseth saying this is not a so-called regime change war, but the regime sure did change, right? Like that's his quote. But of course it is.
Bravo.
They literally killed the regime. Like it's definitely a regime change war. They killed the whole regime, just, on the face of it. That's literally true. The idea that we're going to solve the problem of we can't do nation building by just actually murdering everyone in charge and then leaving is not, I don't think, like the solution that Pete Hegseth thinks.
All right. When we come back, we are going to solve the problem of answering a listener question. It is, in fact, about regime change wars. We'll be back in just a moment. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Well, it's March, and that includes International Women's Day. That's a moment to celebrate women's strength and progress while also recognizing how much women carry every day. The women in our lives care for us. But too often, that means their own emotional well-being, well, sometimes it gets ignored. So for International Women's Day, take a break. Reflect on the important women in your life, your mother, your sister, your partner, even a trusted friend. And think about the roles they play, the expectations they shoulder, the pressures they might feel. That's where therapy from BetterHelp comes in. Therapy can create balance, help set healthy boundaries, and support overall well-being for everyone. BetterHelp has quality therapists. They work according to a strict code of conduct. You start by filling out a short questionnaire about your goals, what you want from therapy. Then BetterHelp will match you with a therapist. If you're not happy, you can switch to a different therapist at any time. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform. It serves over 6 million people globally, and it works. BetterHelp has an average rating of 4.9 out of 5 for a live session, and that is based on over 1.7 million client reviews. Your emotional well-being matters. You can find support and feel lighter in therapy. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/roundtable. That's betterhelp.com/roundtable. Once again, this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. All right, a reminder, we love to answer your questions. If you have a question for us that is short, succinct, pithy, and otherwise not very long, you can email us at podcasts@reason.com. That's podcasts@reason.com. Please put the words listener question in your subject line so that I know it's, in fact, a listener question. This week's listener question comes from Daniel, who writes, "It seems to me that the purpose of all war is to force a surrender or regime change. Is a regime change war distinct and or more immoral than other forms or purposes of war? Killing in self-defense, whether done by a person or a government, is within the bounds of my libertarian ideals." That's what Daniel writes. "If that is generally the case for non-anarchist libertarians, is that limited to responsive action, or can you preemptively strike if you are certain you will be attacked tomorrow, in a week, or in a year? And please, please do not fight the hypothetical built into the question that defeats the purpose of the intellectual moral exercise." I don't know if we're going to be able to do that, Daniel, but we are going to start with a non-anarchist libertarian. Nick, what do you think of this?
To be honest, I've already forgotten the thing I'm not allowed to dismiss as part of the question, but it is very hard to know when you are going to be attacked in advance.
That's the thing. That's the
Right.
thing you're not allowed to do.
No, but I mean, so it is like, can God, create a fist big enough to knock himself out? These questions are just kind of divorced from reality.
I think I asked my Sunday school teacher that once.
Yeah.
That's why I got
When
kicked
you go
out.
to Catholic school, these are the kinds of questions you ponder on an almost hourly basis. But the idea we have fought in defensive wars before, and we did pretty well in them. World War II was ultimately a defensive war. We were the ones who were attacked. Germany, after Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor, Germany declared war on us, and it still took a couple weeks for the Congress to actually authorize war. That's a pretty good model. It worked then, and something like that would work better now. To talk about the difference between regime change versus whatever, there are times when it is okay for the U.S. to bomb foreign countries, and this is not one of them. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, because when we start talking about hypotheticals as opposed to the case in front of us, we start to lose the trail of what just happened. And this is a war. All of the presumptions in favor of it, that Iran was going to get a nuclear weapon, Iran was going to do some kind of damage to us, Iran was going to do this, Iran was going to do that. None of that has been proven, and most of that the administration has already admitted, that actually wasn't the case.
The way that you just fully did the opposite of what this question answer wanted you to do is actually kind of impressive. I will do my best to actually answer it despite not having been named in the question. And by the way, today is Murray Rothbard's 100th birthday, just apropos of nothing, just throwing that out there. But I think that the reason that we often say that the only justified war is a war of self-defense is because the moment that you get hit by a bomb is the moment that you know with 100% certainty that the enemy was going to attack you. And so in this stipulation, we have that knowledge in advance of being hit by the bomb. And I think that is a war of self-defense. So if the question is just to take this hypothetical very seriously, if we are 100% sure that we are in danger of being attacked, can we do something about it? Yes, of course we can. That is self-defense. When you see the fist coming at you, you are allowed to try to parry it. I don't know. I don't get a lot of fist fights.
There's basically a legal term for this, which is imminent threat, right? You have real intelligence.
People use that term. It's such a crap. This is what Nick is objecting to, is people use that term so loosey-goosey, so garbage that you really do have to be careful with it. However, I think the regime change piece of it you still don't get there, even with this hypothetical, because there's almost always going to be a way to protect against or prevent or otherwise kind of short circuit an attack that doesn't involve messing around in the governance structure of another nation. And so I still think we don't get to regime change, even if we know with total certainty that the threat is real. But you do get to, you get to start sending bombs. You do get that.
Matt, is regime change war worse, and is preemptive attack sometimes justified?
It's I will associate myself with Katherine's answer to the unreal hypothetical. I agree with that too in the intellectual and moral thing. The question is whether regime change war is distinct and more immoral. I think it is distinct in that than other forms of war, and in the way that we're contemplating doing a regime change now, or that we did in Grenada, and we've done in other places as well. Those wars tend to not be defensive. I think some of your defensive wars are going to be regime change wars, as World War II absolutely was, and that's fine. The main dividing line that we're talking about is this a war of choice, to where someone who wasn't in any imminent way about ready to attack you, is that going to be justified? That's how this question plays out in the real world. I'm reminded with this this rule to not question the hypothetical of an entire debate that happened 25 years ago that Nick remembers fondly, of talking about whether you would allow torture if there was a ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my God. Months of discourse. Thank God we didn't have Twitter back then.
A
But
hit television show premised several seasons, premised entirely on this question.
Well, in fact, it's kind of that the argument was premised on the hit television show.
Oh, okay. That's
it was
true.
before the hit television show, that I think. But anyways, people talked about it all the time and like, no, don't tell me about hypotheticals. And then what happens in the real world? We did the torture, regardless of how the hypotheticals and the arguments came. Some of the intellectual arguments, I would argue, helped soften the way for the administration to adopt torture tactics. Certainly on the right, there was the libertarian right. There was a not small amount of people like, you know what, maybe ticking time bombs. So, and then good luck looking for instances when we had a ticking time bomb scenario and that the torture produced valuable information as opposed to motivated lies. Very, very difficult. And I think this runs up against that. Yes, if I know that Manhattan is going to be bombed through this window in a day or a week, a year is a little bit too long for being honest about like that. You don't really know it if it's a year in advance. Then yeah, let's go out and do it. If you know, but you don't. You should acknowledge that as well. So the difference between a regime change war, the way that they happen now, is that they're from countries that actually are not engaged in active warfare against us. It's a war of choice on our part to change a regime or decapitate a regime, as we did in Venezuela, and we might yet just be doing in Iran. The underlying structures might still have power by the time we're done with all of this. So that's my answer.
I'll associate myself with Catherine's answer too, like the point that the fist is backed up and about to move towards your face. Yes, you can, in that case, preemptively strike if that is an option for you. At the same time, the thing that I worry about here is because you can't know, because it's very difficult with even the very best intelligence to know whether someone is about to attack you. When you say, well, in that case, it's okay, what you're doing is you're creating a justification, a kind of legal, political, moral justification that is going to be expanded, that is going to be abused by people in power, by people who want an excuse, a reason, like a cover for doing the thing that they wanted to do anyway. And that is what we are seeing with this war in Iran right now, is there is no reason for it. Or there are a bunch of stated reasons for it, some of which are contradictory. Because the thing is, Donald Trump wanted to go to war. He didn't have a good reason for doing so. So he's offered up a whole bunch of reasons for going to war. And the more reasons you give people where you say, this is the okay reason, you can do it this one time, this way, because of this, that's going to mean that that people in power then have more justifications at their disposal for going to war, for torturing people, and for doing awful stuff. And so you really got to cut back on that, is my feeling on this. And in fact, that is a good setup for our next topic about the other military conflict that was in the news last week. This is between the Department of Defense, or the Department of War, whatever we're supposed to call it now, and the AI company.
I think it's the Department of Peace now.
Mm. They do have that building, right? Yeah. So the AI company Anthropic, they make Claude, the Claude chatbot, and its associated tools. And the Department of Defense has been contracting with them, at least since the Biden administration, to use Claude in classified work. And Claude, until very recently, was the only one of these AI tools that was available, that was sort of legally allowed for classified work. The contract that was agreed to by both the Biden and the Trump administrations contained two carve-outs. One was no mass surveillance of Americans, and the other was no autonomous weapon systems, where the decision to kill left humans entirely out of the loop. And over the past month or so, what we've seen is that the Department of Defense, or the Department of War, Pete Hegseth, our Secretary of Beer, has decided that actually we don't want that in there. We want a different contract that says any lawful use. And because Anthropic said no to that, they have now designated Anthropic as a supply chain risk, which means that if this goes through, that no other defense contractor can do business with Anthropic, at least on the defense contracts. And Pete Hegseth says they might want to expand that to just commercial business entirely. This is the first time that designation has ever been applied publicly to an American company. It seems like, Catherine, this is kind of the Department of Defense saying, if you don't do what we want, we are going to destroy your company.
Yeah, I mean, it is wildly disproportionate. This is a relatively minor contract negotiation. It has big stakes, right? Like, I actually think this question, in particular, the first part, like, can we use these tools for mass surveillance, and who can use them, and in what way, is probably the public policy question that I'm the most concerned about personally right now. And
Like, really, of all of them?
yeah, I think so. Like, I think in terms of a thing we could genuinely decide in two radically different ways that will shape the future. Like, I would like to fix entitlements, but like, whatever, that's a morass and we're screwed. And like that, I think that is very important issue.
That's not happening.
I think that's an important issue, but I don't think it's an issue where like actually any real change of path is available to us right now. Whereas the decision, what parts of the federal government can use AI for what thing, and especially for surveilling Americans, is a genuinely open question and one that matters. So I will say, I think this is an important issue, but I think whether or not it is part of this contract with the DoD is super resolvable. Like, we have the DC's entire population is defense subcontractors, basically. Like, everyone I know is a defense subcontractor. So
I'm right here.
They all have contracts. They have contracts. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of contracts with the Department of Defense that exist. They get renegotiated all the time. Renegotiating a contract should not be an apocalyptic event for a company. And being designated as a supply chain risk is an apocalyptic event for a company. The U.S. government broadly, but certainly not Pete Hegseth, for crying out loud, should not hold the ability to just murder a company in this way. This is very similar to like the FCC pulling a broadcast license. Like, it is an existential threat that I don't think the state should hold in the first place. This is the libertarian case for limited government, because you do not have, if you give these kinds of powers, if the Department of Defense has its little camo fingers in every single part of the economy, then you cannot have a free market that operates in any kind of meaningful way. You will always have a bottleneck. You will always have a kind of a killer hiding in there, like something like this designation.
What do you think about that, Nick? I mean, there are people who are saying that there is a way in which this one dust-up between the Department of War and Anthropic represents the total breakdown of American constitutional democracy as we know it, because functionally it is the government asserting the power to take control of one of, if not the most important and powerful technologies, and a giant company worth something like $350-400 billion. And basically saying, if you don't do what we say in exactly the manner we say, Constitution be damned, we are going to murder your company, effectively shut it down. And that's not the American system. That's not a free market system. That's not a free system.
Can I challenge the premise of your question?
Sure.
I'm joking. It is a massively disturbing, serious threat for all of the reasons that Katherine laid out. The biggest thing is, like, if you don't want to work with Anthropic, then cancel the contract and do it, under the terms of the contract, and pay the fine if you end up losing the case that you broke the contract for no good reason or for bad faith, otherwise. But the idea of deeming somebody a supply chain risk, or bringing in the Defense Production Act and trying to take over a company or force them to do your bidding, compelling speech and action, and code is kind of speech. This is of a piece with Donald Trump's socialization, like right-wing socialization of the economy. It's a bad idea. It's a bad idea when it is, when it relates to NVIDIA or Intel and chip makers. It's a bad idea when it has to do with software companies and AI companies, or with widget companies and everything else. And this is of a piece. And this, with Trump's whole kind of unbounded role of government in everything, that the government can tell Jimmy Kimmel or Stephen Colbert, don't make those jokes because we will punish the network, that holds your license, or will block the mergers of the companies that want to get together. This is what is coming into focus as to what the midterm elections are about in the 2028 presidential election. And if your model is a Trumpian model that the government gets to do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, because the chief executive has an itch that he has to scratch, or he has an Epstein Files type scenario that he's got to push off the front page for a while, you are going to lose. You're going to lose big. You're not popular now. And just let's see how low you can go, because this is not something that I think most Americans, even those who hate the left and vote for Trump because he's not the left, et cetera, most people are finding something in the center. And it's not a mushy moderate position. It is a classically liberal idea that the government exists to help with a couple of things to keep the country safe and then get out of the way so that we can live our lives.
Matt, is there something ironic about the fact that this administration has constantly talked up the threat of authoritarian China and its state capitalism model, and yet has also been arguably the most invested in a kind of American state capitalism? It's, even if it's not a formal system, of any president, certainly in my lifetime.
I mean, I don't think that Trump or the administration or MAGA writ large spends a lot of time talking about the communist aspects of China. It's not like a big ideological differentiation. It's just that they're bad and they cheat and they take advantage of us and they do this X, Y, and Z, some of which or much of which is true. But it's not like, how dare they intervene in the economy? I don't recall hearing, Howard Lutnick getting all exercised about that, although maybe I haven't been following his career.
Are you not listening to enough Howard Lutnick, Matt?
I am
we could arrange for you to listen to
hard
more.
to listen to Neil Sedaka and not God rest him in peace. I
think they'll say that China is running an un-American system and that they are ideologically our enemy. And then
I really honestly don't see it. Maybe you drink from a different well, but I don't see a lot of ideological arguments. Just that they're corrupt, they're big, they're bad, they're nasty,
they're successful. They're eating our lunch.
They're trying to, buy properties along the Panama Canal. We don't like that because that's in our hemisphere, et cetera. So I think it's a little bit different. I just think that the entire content of this particular episode of the Reason Roundtable and a lot of the Trump administration is just a reminder that too many people seem to have forgot, which is that power corrupts, and more power corrupts morally.
Woo, Lord Acton in the house.
And because I want to go, there has to be something between power and then absolute power, right? I'm talking about the intermediate stage. That once you can start doing stuff and getting away with it, what do you think as a government, as you're the most powerful, rich country in the world, arguably, definitely the biggest military, you got these buttons you can push and you get away with it. And then cool stuff that you wanted to happen. What do you think is going to happen next? You're going to get Pete Hegseth doing push-ups and shooting Four Locos and telling you he's going to use the fucking National Defense Procurement Act on whatever the hell. It's crazy. And we should take a step back and remember another aphorism, which is when you lie down with dogs, Nick Gillespie, you get up with fleas, which is a way to say
I don't own dogs, Matt Welch.
I don't either, although I appreciate them.
The dogs own themselves.
But
my dogs do not own themselves.
They own you. Yeah.
Too much of American life, and thankfully not Reason Magazine Foundation or anything to do with Reason ever over the years, is wrapped up with stuff having to do with the federal government. Knock it off. Don't take the contract. Tell them to get bent. Walk away from it. Bad things happen because they start dictating terms, and Hegseth starts doing push-ups, and it's all really terrible and stupid. I understand they have a lot of money, and they're doing stuff that could be pretty good for your company, but we need a divorce between the federal government and academia, between the legal establishment, between a lot of sectors of society, and recognize it for a actual threat. They're going to get bigger and they're going to get more predatory regardless of who wins any federal election. And so you need to build protections for it because this is going to keep happening.
I would just
think it's because they're drinking whole milk.
It is.
All the people in the federal government are drinking whole milk, and now we're at war with Iran.
They're drinking whole milk and then they're going right into the sauna. Like I think there's like a curdling that's happening.
In the jeans,
in full jeans and combat boots or construction boots. Very disturbing.
Whole milk, and not Four Loko, Matt, because Four Loko
is illegal.
Is now illegal thanks to Chuck Schumer. You got to drink vodka and Red Bull.
Yeah,
you got to drink vodka and Red Bull if you want that fix, or an Irish coffee, espresso martini.
A Scots Irish coffee among heritage Americans. They really don't want to give anything to the Catholics.
All right, this is driving me to drink, so let's move on to our final segments. Cultural recommendations, what we have been watching, reading, otherwise consuming in the cultural sphere. Katherine, do you have one and only one recommendation for us this week, or do you have three?
I object to tyranny everywhere that it is found around the world.
This is not
including
tyranny.
On this podcast.
This is a private contractual arrangement.
I was going to talk about Spider-Man, but instead I will talk about the fact that I read Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. I don't know. I'm a middle-aged white woman and this is what happens. So let's talk about it. I don't know. It just showed up on my Libby, like my little recommendations or whatever. And I was like, yeah, I remember this book. And I had just read the New Yorker profile of Elizabeth Gilbert, who has fully lost her mind, is the implication of the New Yorker profile. She seems to have really like the seeming balance and self-knowledge, self-awareness that she comes to at the end of Eat, Pray, Love, utterly obliterated by a series of truly chaotic romantic and chemical choices in subsequent years. But
wait, what drugs was she doing?
All of them. Like truly. It's quite a
doing too many drugs for Reason magazine.
It does seem like that's possible. So it's actually
love was the drug for her, though, right?
Right. So it's quite a sad story. She falls in love. She falls in love again. She realizes maybe the falling in love is the real addiction, but that does not stop her from also getting really addicted to real drugs. Also, so but Eat, Pray, Love is interesting. It's the New Yorker piece that I just referenced actually makes this point, and I think that it's a really good one. Every person in America of a certain demographic read this book and thought, like, "Oh my God, it's so me. I totally could do, a year where I live in Italy and then in Bali, or Italy and then go to the ashram and then live in Bali and find myself." But in fact, this is a story of a truly remarkable woman, like a total outlier human who is living at the absolute extremes of kind of spiritual and emotional existence in a whole bunch, and logistical existence in a whole bunch of different ways. And it's actually kind of a testament to her power as a writer that she managed to write this book in a way that felt relatable when she is in fact perhaps the least relatable human to have ever written a book. And I say that advisedly.
You've never written a book.
That's right. And you can draw whatever conclusions you want from that. And I never will. I probably never. I almost definitely never will. Life is long. Anyway, the thing that I offer to you, our mostly male listeners, is if you have a middle-aged lady wife and you haven't read this book, you should maybe do that. Because whatever it is in this book that made every middle-aged lady in America go like, "Oh my God, it's so me, Eat, Pray, Love," that is still alive in them. It is everywhere. And I read this book and I was kind of like, "Oh, it's so me." And then I was like, "No, she's a crazy person." But, that's the duality of woman. If you have a middle-aged lady in your life, read this book, see what you think. Report back to me.
Can you, in 30 seconds or less, explain that in Spider-Man terms?
Yeah. So I also rewatched Into the Spider-Verse with my son this weekend. And both Into the Spider-Verse and Eat, Pray, Love are stories about how you have to accept the things that are interesting and exceptional about yourself in order to fully realize your power. And also both have a scene where a bolt of blue electricity goes through the main character. So they are basically the same story, but I don't think watching Into the Spider-Verse will help you understand your middle-aged wife. Thank you.
You're welcome. Matt Welch, what do you have for us?
Speaking of things that are everywhere, I saw a movie about Elvis called Epic, Elvis Presley in Concert by Baz Luhrmann, who did the Elvis movie from a couple of years ago, the fictional one, and that I liked a lot, despite Tom Hanks. He is a part of that process. He had gotten his hands on a bunch of concert footage and old like tapes and salt like storage mines in Nebraska or whatever the hell. And so there had been a couple of Elvis documentary movies that were kind of one and done in the late 60s and early 70s after his big comeback and the beginning of his Vegas eventual degradation. And they've been sort of forgotten. And so he found those documentaries, he found all this new footage, and then went to Peter Jackson to do his sound magic as he had done for the Get Back documentary for the Beatles, and found some other stuff of like Elvis just sort of like talking in a microphone and talking about his career. And puts it in a movie where you basically see semi-documentary style the first 30 or so minutes is him rehearsing bits of his career, but most of it is just him performing in like 1969, 1970, and 71. This is early fat Elvis. He's sweating so much. And I saw it in IMAX, which is where it was originally released. So you got like 900-foot Elvis who's sweating so much, and his eyes are sometimes there and sometimes not. He's got a small band who's amazing, just like Elvis's late career band is fantastic. Ronnie Tutt on drums, and then the band gets bigger to become a whole Vegas thing, and it's remarkable. Like, this is why IMAX was created. This is why Peter Jackson was created. It's kind of it can be seen in the same kind of thing as the Get Back thing, and also the Summer of Soul documentary, which also reclaimed a bunch of old tapes and prettied it up and made you excited about drums. Again, it's in that vein, and it's just like you get more than kind of you see pictures or you see footage of Elvis from the 50s, and he's he's incredible. Like what's going on there? Humans can't do that. That's too much energy, right? See him in 69 and 70, and it's the beginning of the end, but also the amount of just crazy musicianship and singing ability, band leading, even as he's obviously very wrecked or about to get wrecked, but just this charisma and what it does to every lady. The best part about the movie is he's just constantly kissing lady fans on the mouth. Just like they're with their husbands or whatever. They're middle-aged women who would eat, pray, love in other circumstances, and they can't. He's got like a head a beam coming out of his forehead, and it strikes everyone dumb, and they have to kiss him right now. And he's like, "Yeah, you do," and it's great. It is great. I enjoyed it as much as any movie, and this is why you should go to movies. Big sound, Elvis, kissing ladies, and music. Fantastic.
Yeah, that's gonna bring the cinema back, Matt.
It really is.
Was there a song that you had not heard before, or a performance that rocked your world?
What the hell is the song called? It's yes, there were a couple, and it's like a vamping song where it's just about a woman like picking the plant in the
Poke Annie salad, something like that. Poke salad Annie.
Poke salad Annie. He loves that song so much. There's nothing in the world that he loves. And we see, and they have like 3 or 4 different performances that they're constantly splicing back from. And he's so much more invested in that song. It's like Brian Wilson and
Shorten and Bread.
Shorten and Bread. Like that's screw Heartbreak Hotel and anything else like that. I am going to do Poke Salad Annie, and I'm going to sell it with every fiber of my being, no matter where I am. Even if there's nobody here, dance like Poke Salad Annie is watching. It's fantastic.
I'm sorry to derail this, but Matt, there is an Instagram reel of Iggy Pop talking about being trapped with Brian Wilson playing Shortening Bread, and Iggy Pop, who spent much of his adult life clinically insane, was like, I had to get out of that room.
Elvis, who also maybe did too many drugs, even for a reason.
Yeah. I didn't do enough. If he had taken a laxative, he'd still be with us. That was his big problem. I mean,
sure you can recommend
they talk about that quite openly at Graceland. That's part of the big finish of the tour, to be quite honest.
Just that back, I think it's by the way, where Matt and Nick just like achieved a single mindhood for a minute there. Mm-hmm. Like that's what it's like. I just like people who are listening to this podcast need to understand. You hang out with these dudes, and that shit just happens, and it's quite troubling.
Yeah,
Catherine, also before I'll go on to my recommendation in a second, but how do you define middle age, and is it different for men and women?
Oh,
Like
that's a good
what year?
question. You
Yeah.
are middle-aged and I am middle-aged, Nick, so it must be
No.
quite a span.
Yeah. So it's like independence in American politics. We're a plurality, a
It's like
large and
pornography.
growing plurality. Yeah.
You know it when you see it.
Okay. Interesting.
40 to 64.
So, Peter, I watched Corey Feldman versus the World, which is a documentary by Marcy Hume that I highly recommend for a wide variety of reasons. And the first is, if you have ever wondered how cinema verite gets done, watch this. It is footage from a decade-old tour that Corey and his band, The Angels, who were a group of musically challenged, scantily clad women, who most of whom ended up leaving and speaking very poorly of him, go to small venues. The biggest one, and Matt, this is another mind melt. The biggest one was the Coach House at San Juan Capistrano.
Yes. Saw
But
Terrence
then
Trent
he's
D'Arby.
playing places like Maloney's Bar in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, or something like that. Corey Feldman is somebody who, when I was back in the Teen Mag game, and I hope to get back there someday, I had interviewed him when he was a teen star, when he was at the height of his fame. And it is an amazing portrait of what happens to somebody who achieves a type of celebrity that really isn't available anymore, but you can live on in a broken down version of that because of social media and because of various advances in technology and distribution channels. And what happens when you take too many drugs, when you marry too many women, when you sleep over at Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch too many nights. It's a fantastic portrait of everything that is wrong with celebrity culture in America. And Marcy Hume is just an unbelievably brilliant filmmaker, where the story starts out in a kind and generic way. And then you realize as it goes on, she is telling a very specific narrative about what happens when people become megalomaniacal. And in that sense, I hope that Donald Trump watches this, or at least the people around Donald Trump should watch Corey Feldman versus the World, because, bet on the world and bet against Donald Trump.
We are 3 for 3 for no, but really you can take too many drugs. Bring us home, Suderman.
Well, I saw Scream 7, and I wish I'd taken too many drugs before watching it. Scream 7, otherwise known as Scream Yet Another One. A big takeaway is there's another one. They just keep showing up. It's like wars in the Middle East every few years. Oh, another. And this is my least favorite of the bunch. And it's a throwback. They sort of rebuilt this movie about a year ago because the star of 5 and 6 had said some things that about Palestinians, Jews, just like stuff that maybe the studio didn't want to be associated with. And the original plan for this movie collapsed. So they brought back the writer of the original Scream from 1996, Kevin Williamson, who co-wrote and directed this one. And it's very, very self-referential in a way that is trying to be clever, but really fails. And mostly it just made me remember what a great movie the original Scream is. That is just an absolutely killer kind of, absolutely killer deconstruction of the horror genre up until that point. And what I loved about that movie was this movie, the original Scream showed up at a point in the world of horror filmmaking at which horror movies, horror franchises had kind of become jokes. They had kind of become lazy. Audiences went to them, and those movies made money, but the audiences went to them because they kind of knew what was going to happen. They were always ahead of the film. They knew the formula. They understood exactly how it worked. And it was it was a gag, right? Like it was, oh, right, this person's going to get killed now because these two teens snuck off to have sex, right? So now they've got that's it. That's a death sentence amongst the rules. And so this movie was a movie that also had seen every horror film. And it kind of announced its meta horrorness, like from the very beginning. I mean, it starts with a discussion about favorite scary movies with Drew Barrymore before she gets killed, kind of famously, and then proceeds from there to the point where there is literally a famous monologue announcing the rules of horror films. And then the film proceeds to follow every single one of those rules, but it's just snappy and tense. And Wes Craven is the director of the original Scream, right? This is a guy who's been a big part of the horror renaissance revival in the 1980s, directed the original Nightmare on Elm Street. And part of what he does is he knows how these things are made. And so what this movie does, what the original Scream does, is this is a film for audiences who are always ahead of the film. And it says, hey, audiences, we know you're always ahead. This time, we're going to be one step ahead of you. And part of what makes it great is that it's not just a horror film. It is a mystery. It is a kind of locked house murder mystery thriller, like in the Agatha Christie mold, with a very small number of characters, one of whom, or, well, if you know the ending, maybe more than one of whom has to turn out to be the killer. There's a novel solution to it. It's so great, so clever, so crisp. And this one doesn't have anything to say about the state of modern horror at all. Instead, what it does is it just comments on itself and on the franchise and sort of pats itself on the back for being clever. It's sort of smug and also kind of tedious, and it just really doesn't work. But it has also folded in on itself. This franchise no longer has any other external reference points. It's just Scream all the way down. And it's really disappointing for a film for a film franchise that started out making fun of basically lazy, sort of prolonged, too long in the world horror franchises, because this is exactly the kind of movie that the original Scream was making fun of. Sadly, I cannot recommend Scream another one. Folks,
was Drew Barrymore the one who said anti-Semitic and anti-Palestinian things?
No, that's she's in the first movie.
Tell me it's not Nev Campbell.
No, not Nev Campbell.
Who was the actor who?
The name of the actress who said this. Don't have that in front of me.
Khamenei.
But yeah,
the Ayatollah Khamenei. He really anchored that franchise for a couple of years.
That's how you pronounce it. All right, we got to go. That is our show, folks. If you like this show, if you like the Reason Foundation, you can give us your money by going to reason.com/donate. That's reason.com/donate. Support us, support the Reason Roundtable, support the rest of what we do here at Reason, the Reason Roundtable. Over.